Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, in a clumsy pun worthy of this week's script, the Prime Minister used his conference speech yesterday to call for a great British take-off that leaves no one behind. One thing that certainly took off this week in Manchester was speculation over which top Tory might be the next leader, after Call Me Dave confirmed that he will stand down before the next election. So whose stock was rising, who was falling? We sent the Spectator's Isabel Hardman to Cat's Cookery School in Marlow, Buckinghamshire. Oh yeah, we're going to milk this theme to death tonight, don't you worry. This is a signature roundup of the week.
As a nation, we've been glued to our TV screens this week, watching the ups, downs and soggy bottoms of a contest that gets right to the heart of what it means to be British. No, not the Bake-Off final, the start of the Tory leadership race to succeed the current reigning champion, one dashing David from Chipping Norton. Unlike last night's dramatic finale, the winner of this contest may not be announced for another 4 or 5 years. But that didn't stop the star bakers of the cabinet showing off their signature bakes, and journalists spent all week judging the potential runners and riders at the Tory conference in Manchester.
Have you peaked, Chancellor, in this leadership contest? You worried by Theresa and Boris?
Ambitious George from Tatton, or the Iron Chancellor to give him his new nickname, certainly talked a good game on winning. He was clearly trying to broaden his range of goodies, trying to appeal to swing voters and those who haven't cheered his side on before. Long-term economic flan, anyone?
The lesson of the last 5 years and the victory that followed is that the future favours the bold. We've got to be the builders, the people with the new ideas, the people open to the new thinking. Some stand on the sidelines, some want to knock things down, but we are the builders.
Some people eat cream horns on the sidelines. Some want to knock cake tiers down, but we are the bakers. Meanwhile, that nice Mrs May from Maidenhead showed signs of sharp elbows as she desperately tried to stay in the leadership contest. While George Osborne was trying to woo Labour voters with his red velvet cake, Theresa May had fans of nutty fruit cake in mind. Her traditional right-wing fare went down well with those in the tent, but it left a bitter taste in the mouth for some of those outside.
When immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, it's impossible to build a cohesive society. It's difficult for schools and hospitals and core infrastructure like housing and transport to cope. And we know that for people in low-paid jobs, wages are forced down even further, while some people are forced out of work altogether.
But for other Tory women, the conference was a rather more bittersweet experience. Newly elected female Tory MPs were put on a rota for being photographed walking with the Prime Minister between buildings, in what one of them described to me as being effing arm candy. Oh no, I'm running out of time! And so was that viewer's favourite, the funny one, Boris, who'd fluffed a number of technical challenges early on. But he then delivered a showstopper of a speech that put him straight back in the game, even if he was so tired afterwards that he had to go to bed early.
It is unbelievable now to see that the Labour Party has been piratically captured in a kind of social media twitstorm. And I know these people, my friends, some of them are out there today, actually. I know them. They are the London Labour Party. Trots and militants with vested interests and indeed interesting vests.
Macaroon, macaron, Cameroon, Cameron. Oh yeah, how did I forget about him? When it came to his own speech, David Cameron decided to lay it on real thick to give the new Labour leader a good beating.
He thinks the death of Osama bin Laden was a tragedy. No. A tragedy is nearly 3,000 people murdered one morning in New York. A tragedy is the mums and dads who never came home from work that day. A tragedy is people jumping from the towers after the planes hit. My friends, we cannot let that man inflict his security-threatening, terrorist-sympathising, Britain-hating ideology on this country we love.
Corbyn's response to this attack was to say that Cameron was probably just rattled by the way that he'd re-energised the Labour Party. Or perhaps everyone's just joining because he makes a good courgette cake.
I'm amazed that you got finished.
What you could have done was just a little bit of icing sugar on them.
Oh no!
It looks as though you sat on the top.
That is unique.
Phew! That's a relief. Well, the Tories may have sailed through this week, but when they get back to the Westminster tent, there will be some big problems for them to deal with. Half-baked policies on tax credits, a row on Europe, and a possible vote on Syria are all issues they cannot ice over.
Isabel Hardman there, making a mess at Cat's Cookery School in Marlow. Caroline, should Labour be worried, or how worried should it be, that it is clearly the strategy of Mr Cameron and Mr Osborne to roll their tanks onto the centre ground and onto ground that they think Labour is vacating?
I think it's fair to say that it started with Osborne's budget, where he talked about the national living wage. And we have to be mindful that they're not only parking their tanks on our lawn, they're pushing them into our kitchen and front room as well. And I mean, this week was a speech by Cameron to assert himself within his own party, whatever the running riders for whom will succeed him, but to appeal not just to the centre, but also beyond the centre to the left as well.
So the sort of moderate centre?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
and he thinks that ground's been vacated because the Liberal Democrats have collapsed and because of the sense that Labour's moved further to the left.
I mean, it's quite brazen. I was going through the announcements. They've now pinched about 6 or 7 major ideas from the Labour manifesto, including devolving business rates, a National Infrastructure Commission, which they opposed when Labour suggested it.
And paid leave for grandparents,
apprenticeship,
business rates to councils, the national living wage as well. I mean, you know, I think part of being in opposition is part of your job is to scrutinise, but also to come up with good ideas that governments nick. But they are actually absolutely brazen about it, and it is all centred on that centre ground vote that they see up for grabs.
One of the notable things about Manchester, Michael, was that there is almost no resistance inside the Tory party now to this centrist strategy. What we might think of as the old Tory right, or even the radical right, is now being marginalised.
Yes, I mean the things you haven't mentioned so far were the attack on racism, sexism, homophobia, for which he gets standing ovations. And, you know, given that he legislated for gay marriage in the teeth of opposition a couple of years ago, gives him a very strong position on these social issues. And whatever resistance he met a couple of years ago, you know, the party clearly has swallowed it all. It's absolutely there and standing up to applaud it.
And I think it would be fair to say that it's a sign of how governments shape that centre ground. And some of those policies on tackling sexual inequality, for example, stunted under the last Labour government. And we remember how David Cameron wanted to detoxify the Tory brand, and part of that was much more sort of social equality as part of his frame. But he will have to face up to the fact that whatever he says in terms of rhetoric, it has to be matched by action. And clearly this week he's being pushed on working families' tax credits by Boris and by others, because these are working people who are out there doing, you know, not glamorous jobs, and they depend on these tax credits to pay their bills.
And significantly by the Sun.
Exactly.
With a lot of blue-collar,
Yep.
Tory-inclined voters who could be hit by the change in,
So he's
in
not
tax
off the hook.
credits.
He's not,
not at all.
At all.
But let me ask you this. Do you think when we look back, will that David Cameron speech be seen as the end of Thatcherism?
I must say that
I made him think there, Caroline.
I must say that hadn't struck me. I mean, for
You
instance,
seem to draw a line under it.
No, I mean, for instance, Margaret Thatcher was much more of a social liberal than many people realise. What David Cameron and George Osborne are doing in the economy has very strong overtones of Thatcherism. The thing that they've done, which has been least Thatcherite, has been the collapse in home ownership, which they've both now committed themselves to addressing. So I must say, I don't see it in those terms.
Well, the Northern Powerhouse owns more to Mr. Heseltine than it does to Mrs. Thatcher.
Definitely.
As Mr. George Osborne said something really interesting. He said effectively, I used to think in his speech, he didn't use these words, but these were really, he said, I used to think it all could be done by the market. Now I realise there's a big role for government too.
Good Lord, but that's what Margaret Thatcher thought as well. I mean, Margaret...
She never said that.
Oh, but she constantly intervened, to save jobs, and she was a big interventor. I mean, for example, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, you couldn't sell the post office, you couldn't sell British Rail. I mean, she was in many ways a Conservative with a small c.
But the other thing is in tackling, poverty and tackling social mobility, then, there is a role for government to play in that, and it doesn't come cheap.
No.
Dealing with some of the...
And it doesn't come easy.
The challenges that hold families back and children back do not come easily. There's no short-term fix. You have to be in for the long haul.
The forerunner to the family credit and so on was a thing called family income supplement, invented by Keith Joseph.
Yes. It seemed to me, Michael, there are three potential clouds on the Tory horizon after the situation that they're in. There's a global economic downturn that throws our economy back into recession. There's an intra-party civil war over Europe and the referendum. And there's just endless jockeying for the leadership, which has started in Manchester. Which is the most dangerous for them?
I think the global economy. I mean, you might have expected me to say the intra-party fight over Europe, but in a way not, because the reason we're having a referendum is that it's all designed to settle the problem within the Conservative Party, because there must be, within 2 years, a resolution of this question. There will be a vote and there will be a result. And if the result is that we stay in the European Union, then that very large group of Conservative MPs who think the opposite will have been dealt with. I mean, the people will have spoken. That will be an end to it. And if we leave the European Union, by the way, also it's been dealt with. So I don't think that's the dangerous one.
It's interesting that Michael mentions the chance of a global downturn. It is likely we're closer to the next recession than we are further away from the last recession. And at the Labour conference, the Labour leadership was also raising the spectre of another recession coming. Mr. Corbyn and Mr. MacDonald did that as well. And in a sense, although you're not wishing it, in a way, Labour almost needs that to happen, because if the Tories approach 2020 with the economy still going the way it's going, it's kind of unstoppable.
It is really difficult to fight against when there is growth and more people are in work. There's no doubt about that. But part of it is also about how does everybody share the benefits of that. And that's where Cameron has got a challenge. How does he marry up? Well, there's two things. Let's just say the economy does grow. How does he make sure that that is shared more equally across society? But the danger of an economic downturn is it doesn't give him the confidence to pay for some of the things to help some of the people he's mentioned this week in his speech.
And it could change everything. And that may also affect the Tory leadership. If the economy continues to grow, it would seem to me that George Osborne is probably dead-on favourite to be the next Tory leader. But if the economy goes pear-shaped, it could be anybody's.
I mean, I think it's still a tough choice for the Conservative voters in the country who will have the final say. Let's say the two candidates are George and Boris. I mean, George is clearly the more serious of the two candidates, but Boris will remain probably much more popular in the country. Now, if Tories think that the next election is going to be quite close, they may not want to take the risk of electing the less popular of the two in the country, even though I think now probably George Osborne will be ahead with Conservative voters. By the way, just as a postscript to all of this, while we've been talking about the mood of this conference, I think it's just worth saying that it looked as though Mrs May was attending a different conference, as though she really hadn't understood the way in which the Tory party was going to be repositioned this week. I half wondered, in my Machiavellian way, whether she had been lured into a trap.
Well, the speech was approved by Downing Street.
Well, exactly.
So there we go.
I found myself in that position many years ago. I made a desperate speech at the conference, which had been approved by the Prime Minister.
I think I was at that speech.
And it rang a bell. I thought, aha, Mrs. May must have had that speech approved, and it's done her no good at all.
Now, the question I need you to advise Jeremy Corbyn. Did you bow when you became, or kneel when you became a Privy Councillor?
No, of course.
Did you kiss the Queen's hand?
Of course. That is what you have to do. By the way, it's an extremely demanding physical operation. Because you have to kneel on your right knee with the other knee not kneeling, and take the Queen's hand in your right hand.
Onto
it's
a
quite
footstool
demanding.
as well, in which you're worried that you'll balance, you'll fall over and take out the Queen or something.
You're going to put your leader off even more.
I've been getting away with it all